Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. In the magical world of Harry Potter, dueling holds a special place. It's not just a way to settle disputes. It's an art form, a sport in its own right, thrilling, dangerous, and deeply rooted in tradition and history. A duel can be a spectacle or a matter of life and death. Today I'll share with you some of the most fascinating facts about magical duels. And perhaps you'll never see this magical ritual the same way again. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Duels come with many formalities. In the wizarding world, a duel isn't simply a back-and-forth exchange of spells. It's a ritual, full of traditions that must be strictly followed. Duelists are required to bow to each other before the match begins, hold their wands in a precise stance, and only start combat once the signal is given. These formalities highlight that a duel is not a street brawl, but a magical art with its own code of conduct and ethics. Number 2. The Hogwarts Dueling Club was formed in the 1980s. When Dumbledore learned that students at Hogwarts were engaging in secret magical battles, he and Professor Flitwick decided to take control of the situation by founding an official dueling club. The idea was simple. Create a safe and supervised environment where young witches and wizards could sharpen their skills and learn the rules of magical combat. Unfortunately, the original club didn't last long. Years later, it was resurrected, or rather bungled, by the clumsy and self-absorbed Gilderoy Lockhart. Number 3. Magical dueling is considered a sport. Though not as popular as Quidditch, magical dueling is regarded as a legitimate sport. Think of it as the wizarding equivalent of fencing: elegant, fast, strategic. Duels demand not just power, but tactics, composure, and discipline. For many witches and wizards, dueling is more than practice or conflict. It's a contest of spirit, intellect, and skill. Number 4. Underground. Duels are forbidden at Hogwarts. Despite many students' eagerness to test their magical might, unsanctioned duels are strictly prohibited. The reason is clear. The risk of serious injury is far too high. This is precisely why the creation of the official dueling club seemed like the best option. But even with the club in place, duels outside of it are considered rule violations and may lead to severe punishment. Number 5. Aspen wands are ideal for dueling. Not every wand is fit for dueling. Aspen wood is considered ideal for combative magic. The bearer of an aspen wand is often a natural-born duelist. Rumors whisper of a secret society known as the Silver Spears, which only accepted witches and wizards who owned aspen wands. Eyewitnesses claim its members possessed astonishing combat skills. Number 6. Yew wands were feared. In contrast to aspen, yew wands were feared. Superstitions surrounding this wood made duels against its wielders highly undesirable. It's no wonder that Lord Voldemort himself carried a yew wand. The question is, did the wood create darkness, or did it draw in those who already carried it? Number 7. Dumbledore likely saw the hidden value of the dueling club. The creation of the dueling club may have had a deeper purpose. Dumbledore was far too wise not to foresee the return of darkness. He understood that students needed to be prepared, even if they weren't yet aware of it themselves. In this way, the club was not just about keeping teenagers out of trouble. It was about forging the future protectors of the magical world. When the Second Wizarding War began, the skills gained in clubs like these may well have saved more than one life. Number 8. The duel between Dumbledore and Grindelwald was the greatest in history. When wizards speak of duels, one name always rises: Dumbledore, the other, Grindelwald. In 1945, the two most powerful sorcerers of their age met in a hidden fortress in the Austrian Alps. The battle lasted for hours. No audience, no rules, only thunder, fire, silence, and spells that bent the sky. It was not a duel, it was a war in miniature, and it changed everything. Their history made it worse. Brothers once, in belief and ambition. But where Dumbledore stepped back, Grindelwald stepped over. "It must end between us, Gellert," Dumbledore once said, according to a letter found in Bathilda Bagshot's attic. And it did. Eyewitnesses, only a few and sworn to secrecy, claimed mountains cracked and the air itself screamed. The ministry sealed the site. It remains unmarked. Dumbledore emerged with the Elder Wand. He never explained how. He only said, "Power must be earned, not taken." Grindelwald, bloodied and silent, was locked in Nurmengard, the prison he built for others. He never escaped, and he never spoke Dumbledore's name again. The duel didn't just end a dark reign, it ended a friendship too painful to name. That duel became legend. It's studied at every magical academy, not for its power, but for its cost. Greatness is not victory, Dumbledore told Harry in Half-Blood Prince. It is the strength to do what must be done. And that's what he did one final time, against the only wizard he ever loved. Number 9. Shield charms are the foundation of any duel. The first lesson in dueling isn't how to strike, it's how to stand your ground. A true duelist survives by shielding, not attacking. "You block first, then think," said Professor Flitwick in Order of the Phoenix. The shield charm, Protego, is the spell every champion casts without thinking. It's not just a wall, it's timing, precision, faith in your own wand. Edward Stratford knew that better than anyone. In the early 1800s, he was called the Stone Mirror. He never attacked first. In fact, some said he barely attacked at all, but no one could land a spell on him. During the 1813 Isle of Skye Championship, Stratford faced Hector Mulgrave, a known fire charmer who specialized in bombardment hexes. For 25 minutes, sparks flew, smoke swirled, and yet Stratford never moved his feet. Every spell vanished into his shimmering blue shield. Reporters claimed he used a modified version of Protego Maxima, refined over years. He never confirmed it. "Defense is not hiding," he once told a crowd of students in Dublin. "It is choosing not to fall." He kept his wand low, movements tight, never flashy, and he never lost a match. Modern duelists still study his techniques. His journals, published posthumously in A Guide to Lasting Shields, are required reading at the International Dueling Academy. In them, Stratford wrote, "A wand is a sword, but the mind, when calm, is armor." Most duelists today agree. You don't win with your first strike, you win by standing when the storm is over. Number 10. Duels used to be a matter of honor. Before dueling became sport, it was war dressed in manners. In the 1600s, a wizard insulted in public could challenge his offender by spell. No judges, no rules, just pride, rage, and wands. Refusal meant disgrace. Acceptance meant danger. "Blood answered blood," wrote historian Idris Bain in Magical Traditions of the Old Isles. Some saw it as justice, others called it madness. The most infamous case was the Black Rosier duel of 1672. Cassius Black accused Thaddeus Rosier of hexing his sister's memory. Rosier denied it. Black spat on the floor. The duel took place at midnight on the cliffs of Tintagel. Witnesses say the spells lit the sea like fire. Rosier died. The Blacks claimed honor was restored. The Wizengamot, shaken, declared the tradition too deadly to continue. By 1725, the Code of Dueling was introduced. It demanded structure, witnesses, safety spells, boundaries. Killing curses were banned. Public duels moved from graveyards to gardens. "A wizard's honor is not worth a life," declared Supreme Mugwump Ignatius Tuft. And most agreed. The duels became less personal, less fatal, but never less serious. Even today the echoes remain. Pure-blood families still whisper about defending lineage. Some old manors still have dueling chambers with stone floors and blood-stained walls. But for most, dueling is no longer about revenge. It's about control, skill, precision. And perhaps, somewhere beneath all that, still a little bit of pride. Number 11. Unforgivable curses are banned in official duels. There are 3 spells that end every conversation. Avada Kedavra, Cruciatus, Imperius, the unforgivable curses. No matter the arena, no matter the reason, using one in a duel is the end of your career. Every duelist signs the code of magical combat before stepping onto the floor. "No curse that steals life, mind, or will shall be cast," it reads, in thick black ink. Cross that line and you're not a competitor anymore, you're a criminal. In 1987, Victor Ward was the rising star of the European Dueling League. Tall, cold, brilliant. He moved like shadow, struck like fire. Crowds loved him. The press called him the Mind-Breaker. In the finals of the Transylvanian Cup, facing Callista Vane, he paused mid-duel. His lips moved. Her wand fell. Her eyes went blank. "Imperio," someone whispered in the stands. Silence followed, then chaos. Ward never denied it. When summoned before the Dueling Council, he simply said, "I did what was necessary to win." That sentence became infamous. His wand was snapped, his name erased from the league's rolls. He was a genius, Callista later said, but after that no one spoke his name with respect again. His trophies were melted. His portrait in the Hall of Champions was taken down the same day. Even Hogwarts teaches the rule early. "There is no honor in control," said Professor Moody, Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise, though his meaning was twisted. But the lesson stuck. A true duel is about balance, not domination, and no champion ever stood tall by bending another's will. Not once, not ever. Number 12, Professor Flitwick, was a world dueling champion. Before he ever stood on a stack of books to teach first years how to levitate feathers, Phileas Flitwick was feared across Europe. In 1953, he stepped into the grand arena of Oslo and left with the World Dueling Cup, not just once, 3 years in a row. Opponents twice his size never laid a wand on him. His signature move, Protego Tenebris, followed by a flick shot Stupefy, became a legend. "He moves like lightning," wrote Witch Weekly, "and hits like thunder." Dumbledore knew all this. That's why he asked Flitwick to co-found Hogwarts' first official dueling club. "There's no one better to teach poise under pressure," he said, in a staff meeting, according to a memory recorded in the Pensieve. And it was true. Flitwick didn't just cast spells, he danced with them. He could disarm a 7th year with a smile, or block 3 curses mid-air without blinking. He once duelled a dark wizard in Vienna and won using only 3 spells. Students underestimated him. His small stature, cheerful laugh, and love of fairy lights fooled many, but when he demonstrated proper dueling form, even the Weasley twins fell silent. "I didn't know someone that short could flip like that," Fred whispered. "Did you see his Expelliarmus?" George added. "I didn't even see his one move." The wand was sycamore, the core unicorn hair, custom cut for speed and precision. Flitwick still kept it close, even when retired. "It's not the wand," he once said during a rainy Thursday lesson. "It's what you choose to do with it." Then he turned to Neville Longbottom, nodded once, and smiled. "Now let's try that disarming charm again, shall we?" Number 13. Dueling declined after the Second Wizarding War. After the Battle of Hogwarts, the air in the wizarding world changed. Wands were still carried, but drawn less often. Too many had seen real war. Too many had lost someone to a curse that couldn't be blocked. Magical duels, once thrilling, once celebrated, felt too close to death. "There's nothing sporting about a wand in your face anymore," said Dennis Creevy in an interview for the Daily Prophet. He had seen his brother fall and never duelled again. Tournaments were cancelled. The British Dueling League shut its doors in 2000. Even Hogwarts stopped hosting practice matches. Professor Flitwick, once a champion, quietly removed the dueling syllabus from his third-year curriculum. Students asked about it less. "They've had enough fighting for a lifetime," McGonagall told the staff, and the halls, once echoing with shouts of "Stupefy" and "Protego," fell quiet. But time moved forward. Pain softened. By 2008, whispers began, small events, local matches, careful demonstrations, not war, but sport. One young witch, Alethea Kettleburn, granddaughter of the famous Care of Magical Creatures professor, helped reignite the flame. "We've forgotten that dueling isn't about hurting," she said during a charity duel in Devon. "It's about focus, grace, control. Her performance, full of clever footwork and perfectly timed disarms, reminded the crowd what dueling used to be. That night, someone in the audience stood and clapped first. It was Kingsley Shacklebolt. He'd fought at the Ministry. He'd seen the worst of it. But now he smiled. "Let the children duel," he said. "Let them choose magic over fear." Slowly, the dueling halls reopened, the rules returned, and though some still flinched at the sound of spellfire, others saw something new in it. Hope. Number 14. Every duelist has their own strategy. In a magical duel, chaos is only an illusion. Every great duelist knows it's not just about power, it's about the plan. Quick-thinking wizards strike fast, hoping to overwhelm. Others draw it out, hiding behind shields, setting traps, waiting for mistakes. Some duelists whisper nonsense spells just to make their opponent blink. Confusion is a weapon too. Melisande Barrow was one of the best. She never began with a curse. Instead, she flicked her wand and muttered, "Pilus mollis," the soft hair charm. Her enemies always froze for a second, just long enough. "She's lost her mind," one of them once muttered before being hit squarely in the chest by a blasting curse. That was her trick. Kindness first, then fire. The Ministry archives record one match in 1974 during the National Dueling Tournament. Melisande stood calmly, wand at her side, and smiled. Her opponent, Lucan Quaid, scoffed. "You're not serious," he said. She whispered something that made his eyebrows fluff out like clouds. He laughed. She didn't. 1 moment later, he was on the floor, winded and dazed. She bowed before the judges could even speak. The books say dueling is about control. "Wand at the ready, mind even steadier," said Professor Flitwick in Order of the Phoenix. But strategy, real strategy, is about knowing what the other person expects and then doing the opposite. Melisande Barrow didn't win by force. She won by making her enemies laugh and then making them fall. Number 15. A wand can refuse to fight. In the shadowy corridors of magical history, few moments spark as much whispered fascination as the event that unfolded on a damp October afternoon in 1879 when Randall Brickwell stepped onto the moss-covered dueling platform of Wansbury Court. Known for his impeccable charm and sharp mind, Brickwell had built his reputation on calculated precision, a duelist whose spells danced like silver threads through the air. But in a single, shattering moment, his name would become synonymous with failure, not for lack of skill, but for something far more mystifying, the betrayal of his wand. The duel was no ordinary contest of egos. Brickwell's opponent, Cedric Malloran, was a rising force in the dueling circuits, a fire-hearted wizard with a temper to match his incantations. Their conflict had been building for weeks, culminating in a challenge that attracted the keenest minds of the British wizarding world. Spectators filled the stands of Wansbury Court, cloaked against the damp chill, eager to witness sparks fly, perhaps even blood spilled. But what they saw instead challenged the very core of wand law. As the officiator called for the traditional bow, both wizards raised their wands. Brickwell's a polished blackthorn with a dragon heartstring core, elegant and loyal, or so he believed. When the command to begin echoed across the field, the two launched into their opening spells, Brickwell leading with a shimmering Protego Maxima. But as Malloran's offensive barrage surged forward, Brickwell raised his wand to counter, and that was when the impossible happened. The wand slipped from his fingers, not with the clumsy inertia of a novice, but with deliberate resistance, as if it rejected his very grip. The air seemed to bend as the wand pirouetted in mid-air and sailed, point first, toward Malloran, landing gracefully at his feet. For a second there was silence. Then a gasp tore through the crowd, followed by an eruption of confused cries. Brickwell stood frozen, hand outstretched, lips parted, not in a spell, but in stunned disbelief. His wand had not been disarmed, it had left him. Within hours, theories flooded the newspapers. The Daily Prophet ran the headline, "Wand walks away. Is sentience in our spells stronger than we thought?" For many, the idea that a wand could voluntarily abandon its master was unthinkable. But for seasoned wand makers and scholars of arcane woodlore, the incident was not entirely without precedent. In fact, Garrick Ollivander himself would later reference the Brickwell affair during a public lecture in 1952, remarking, "Wands are not tools, nor are they simply extensions of the hand. They are entities of focus and feeling. When a wizard falters, a wand may falter with him or without him." The heart of the mystery lay in the wand's origin. Brickwell's wand had not always belonged to him. It was originally crafted for a formidable duelist named Elric Dunmore, a ministry enforcer whose death in the line of duty left the wand without a master. Brickwell, impressed by its craftsmanship and eager for a competitive edge, purchased the wand from a private collector in Knockturn Alley. Though it had accepted him initially, subtle signs of friction had always lingered, wand sparks veering slightly off, counterspells arriving a breath too late. These signs, dismissed by Brickwell as natural adjustments, were perhaps early warnings. According to archives recovered from the Department of Magical Artifacts, Elric Dunmore's magical signature was particularly dominant. His imprint remained etched within the wand's core, a phantom echo of loyalty. While wands can shift allegiance when wrested by force or through deep connection, the process is far from mechanical. The wand chooses the wizard, as Ollivander famously states in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, but what he omits is that the bond, once formed, can persist stubbornly, sometimes eternally. Brickwell's downfall was further complicated by his own insecurities. Witnesses later described his behavior on the day of the duel as distracted, uncertain. He had spent the night before pacing his Manners drawing room, questioning whether he was truly prepared. Such moments of doubt, invisible to the eye, but palpable to a wand's sensitive core, may have influenced the Blackthorn's decision. Blackthorn wood, after all, is notoriously temperamental, flourishing in the hands of those who have faced turmoil, but demand clarity. Brickwell's wavering confidence may have severed what little loyalty remained. The duel's outcome triggered a wave of research into wand sentience. The Department of Magical Research formed a temporary commission titled Project Autonomia, tasked with investigating the autonomy of wands in high-stress situations. Their findings, while never publicly released in full, were partially leaked in the late 1880s and contained startling observations. One report stated, "Instances have been recorded in which a wand presented with two conflicting magical signatures, such as a new master and a prior dominant user, will default to the stronger imprint under duress." This reinforced the theory that Brickwell's wand had, in essence, remembered Dunmore more clearly than it had ever known Brickwell. Another case, buried deep in the same report, recounted a wizard in Prague whose wand allegedly detonated during a moment of intense moral conflict, leaving only scorch marks and silence. Though extreme, these stories paint a clear picture. Wands are not passive. They feel, remember, and, when pressed, can act. Wand maker Theodora Tiskin, whose family had crafted wands since the 17th century, provided a crucial insight during her interview with the Wizarding Times in 1882. "Wands carry echoes," she said. "Every triumph, every hesitation, every betrayal of courage leaves a fingerprint. When a duel begins, the wand doesn't just respond to the incantation, it listens to the soul. If it senses contradiction, it may refuse the call." Number 16. Some duels lasted for days. In the world of wizardry, few spectacles matched the raw intensity of a magical duel. Wand against wand, will against will. Every flick of the wrist could be the difference between life and death. While most duels were settled in a matter of minutes, some, driven by pride, power, or vengeance, spiraled into epic, drawn-out battles that left both participants shattered. The history of such encounters is shrouded in legend, but records within the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and private family archives unveil astonishing accounts of duels that defied time itself. One such duel, whispered about in old wizarding families, and briefly mentioned in the restricted section of Hogwarts Library, spanned 3 days and 2 nights, marking it as the longest magical duel ever recorded. This legendary duel occurred in the early 1700s between 2 powerful pure-blood wizards, Phineas Black, a great-uncle of Sirius Black and a notoriously temperamental figure in the Black family tree, and Theodore Rozier, a feared duelist from the infamous Rozier bloodline. Their animosity was not born from mere rivalry, but from a blood feud that dated back generations. The Blacks and the Roziers, though both members of the Sacred 28, harboured a seething contempt for each other, with political disagreements, marriage disputes, and long-held grudges fueling their hatred. The circumstances that led to their duel were ignited by a scandal involving a disputed magical artifact, a cursed medallion once belonging to Morgana herself. Both families claimed rightful ownership, citing ancient ties to the enchantress. The medallion was believed to hold the power to amplify a wizard's magic during battle, and neither Phineas nor Theodore was willing to relinquish the claim. When negotiations failed, and threats were exchanged in public at the Wizards' Council, there remained only one path forward, a formal duel sanctioned under the ancient rite of the wand, an arcane protocol used only when all other means had failed. The duel was held in a desolate stretch of moorland just outside Tintagel, a place long associated with old magic and treacherous weather. Witnesses were few, mostly family members and 2 representatives from the Department of Magical Games and Sports, sent not to regulate the duel, but merely to observe. There were no time limits, no protective enchantments, and no healing intermissions. The only rule? No killing curse. The battle began with a flurry of hexes and shield charms. Onlookers claimed that the very air shimmered with raw energy as the 2 wizards unleashed torrents of spells, transfiguring the terrain around them into a chaotic mess of flaming pits, levitating boulders, and warped trees with biting branches. As the duel raged on, the sun dipped below the horizon, but neither man yielded. Night fell, and still they fought, taking only short pauses to catch their breath, drink enchanted potions, and scrawl desperate glyphs into the earth for protection. By the second day, both men were burned, bruised, and near the limits of their magical reserves. Phineas had reportedly used a rarely seen variant of the Flagranti curse, setting Theodore's robes alight with blue fire that resisted standard extinguishing charms. Theodore responded with a viciously modified reducto that shattered an entire section of ground beneath Phineas's feet, nearly burying him alive. Neither man was willing to concede. Both had already passed the threshold where pride blurred into madness. There are handwritten testimonies from Cassiopeia Black, a niece of Phineas, preserved in the Black family's private archive at Grimmauld Place. She wrote, "Uncle Phineas was not a man of mercy, nor was Rozier one of reason. I watched as lightning split the sky, not from weather but from wand. Their duel was not for victory, it was punishment, vengeance, and vanity bound in fire." The letter, later annotated by Sirius Black himself, adds a chilling note. They weren't dueling to win. They were dueling so the other would lose everything. On the 3rd night, exhaustion took hold. Their spells grew erratic, their movements slower. Phineas collapsed twice, only to rise again using sheer will and draughts of replenishing potions from his enchanted hip flask. Theodore's wand, an unyielding piece of blackthorn said to be passed down from a French ancestor who fought in the Goblin rebellions, began to splinter at the handle, yet neither surrendered. Both wizards, driven by generations of bitterness, had resolved to go beyond physical limits. Eventually, their bodies betrayed them. Phineas lost consciousness first. His last spell, a feeble attempt at conjuring a wall of ice, fizzled into smoke before it formed. Theodore stood for a few minutes more, bleeding from the mouth, his wand arm trembling. He fell forward, not from a spell but from sheer depletion. The department officials, who had stayed at a safe distance, finally intervened, levitating both men onto stretchers and sending emergency patronuses to St. Mungo's. The healers at the hospital were horrified. Both duelists had suffered extensive internal injuries, magical backlash, and severe mental exhaustion. The burns on Theodore's chest were cursed. The blue fire from Phineas's wand had seeped into his bloodstream. Phineas, meanwhile, had a fractured spine from repeated spell impacts and signs of magical overexertion, a condition in which a wizard's core becomes unstable, threatening permanent damage. It took 6 weeks before either could speak again, and longer still before they could walk unaided. Number 17. Certain spells are banned even in training. In the echoing halls of Ilvermorny's School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, tales of magical mishaps have been whispered from one generation to another, but none has left as lasting an impression as the infamous Triton incident of 1987. The stone corridors still seem to remember the panic of that afternoon, when a well-intentioned duel turned into a week-long crisis. It began in the school's official dueling club, a revered institution meant to foster discipline and finesse in the art of spellcasting. Yet despite the club's structure and rules, one student's misstep led to a regulation that now affects magical institutions worldwide, the strict prohibition of certain spells even in a practice setting. It was during a Thursday evening match when fifth-year student Archibald Fletz, known for his impressive aptitude in transfiguration, stepped into the arena opposite Marlowe Thimbleby, a fellow Ravenclaw with a competitive edge. The crowd of students leaned in with anticipation, expecting a traditional exchange of disarming and shielding charms. But what followed defied all expectations. In a burst of overconfidence, Archibald attempted a complex transfigurative curse, aiming not at Marlowe's wand, but at Marlowe himself. The intended effect was to humorously transfigure his opponent's shoes into slippery flippers. However, Archibald's incantation overreached, striking Marlowe squarely in the chest and transforming him fully and irrevocably into a bright green Triton. The change was not simply cosmetic. Marlowe lost the ability to speak, to walk, to wield his wand. He was immediately whisked away to the hospital wing, where healers and professors alike attempted to reverse the spell, but Archibald had used an unstable combination of mutatio corporis with an experimental element he had read about in a restricted volume from the library's transfiguration section. As a result, the magic was untraceable and nearly irreversible. For 7 long days, Marlowe remained in a water tank conjured in the hospital wing, breathing through gills and flicking a tail instead of legs. This incident led to a furious debate among the school's faculty and the International Confederation of Wizards Educational Standards Board. The question was simple yet deeply troubling. Should students be allowed to cast high-level spells during training, even under supervision? The answer came swiftly. A ban was issued on any spell that could alter a person's physical form, regardless of intention or presumed control. The regulations were rewritten to include specific categories. All transfiguration spells directly affecting the human body were to be strictly forbidden in dueling settings, whether for practice or demonstration. The regulation extended beyond Ilvermorny. In fact, Professor Flitwick himself referenced the incident in a staff meeting at Hogwarts in the early 1990s, when Dueling Club was reinstated for the first time in decades. According to the Hogwarts A History of Discipline and Practice, Flitwick stated, "We shall not tolerate irresponsible spellwork. I've seen firsthand what happens when ego outruns wisdom." While this quote never made it into public records, it was documented in an internal memo retrieved from the archives by magical historian Dorcas Penhaligon, whose paper on dueling ethics reshaped how magical education approached discipline. Even more concerning than physical transformation spells were those affecting the human mind. Before the Triton incident, there was a growing trend among students to experiment with memory charms and suggestion spells in private duels. In 1983, an obscure case in Mahutukoro involved a student who cast Obliviate on their opponent to erase the memory of a particularly embarrassing defeat. The affected student wandered for 2 days around the school grounds, unaware of their own name. Though the case was hushed by local authorities, it served as a chilling reminder: mental integrity must never be compromised, not even in jest. The unforgivable curses, of course, were already off-limits in any setting, educational or otherwise, but the conversation shifted when it came to less severe but still dangerous mental manipulations. The imperious curse, for instance, was notoriously seductive in its subtleness. A student under its influence might appear calm, even cheerful, while unknowingly becoming a puppet. In a 1992 discussion paper by magical safety advisor Loretta Tocquell, it was noted that suggestive magic, even if cast with humor, carries consequences deeper than surface laughter. These spells now fall under a wider umbrella of prohibited enchantments during practice duels. Despite these strictures, not all students obeyed. In 2004, Beauxbatons Academy expelled a promising young wizard, Émile Duvier, after he used a charm akin to Confundus to disorient his opponent in a match. Although the spell didn't cause lasting damage, the ethical breach was clear. He betrayed not only the rules, Headmistress Olympe Maxime was quoted as saying, but the spirit of magical learning. We do not sharpen our wands at the cost of another's dignity. The enforcement of these rules was strengthened by a new system of oversight. At Hogwarts, for example, every official duel was to be observed by 2 staff members, one of whom had to be a certified Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. The revised rulebook included a lengthy list of banned spells, some obvious, others more obscure. Even certain charms from the Book of Moderate Jinxes were outlawed, such as Geliflecto, a seemingly harmless curse that turned a duelist's knees into jelly. While amusing in theory, it had once caused a Slytherin student to collapse headfirst onto a torch bracket. What often goes unnoticed is how these regulations shaped the very nature of magical dueling. It was no longer about raw power or experimental spellcraft, but about precision, control, and respect. The ideal duel became a ballet of timing and wit, not a chaotic explosion of reckless enchantments. Magic without discipline, as Dumbledore once wrote in a private letter to the Department of Magical Education, is merely destruction with flair. The psychological aspect of dueling was also emphasized. Students were taught not just how to cast spells, but how to read intent, anticipate movement, and channel emotion into defense rather than offense. The story of Archibald and Marlowe was often used as a case study in ethics classes. Archibald himself never duelled again, choosing instead to specialize in magical creature care. Rumors persist that he still corresponds with Marlowe Thimbleby, who recovered fully but declined to return to competitive magic. He later authored a book titled Between Gills and Guilt, a memoir that explored the event with both humor and sorrow. Number 18. Some duelists were inspired by Muggle martial arts. In the misty highlands of northern Japan, where the forest breathes with ancient magic and mountain peaks kiss the clouds, stood a secluded dojo made not of stone or brick, but of polished cedar, enchanted rice-paper walls and spells of silence woven into its frame. It was here, hidden far from the eyes of the ministry, that Kenjiro Takada honed a new philosophy of magical combat. Revered in his homeland as the Flash of Kyoto, Takada was not born into any noble wizarding line, nor did he attend prestigious magical institutions like Mahutokoro. His mastery was self-forged, inspired not solely by one technique, but by the flowing, calculated grace of Muggle martial arts, particularly the art of Aikido. Kenjiro was first introduced to Aikido in his youth, during a turbulent time when wizarding families in Japan debated the necessity of hiding from Muggle traditions. Though magical society remained cautious, Kenjiro was entranced by a demonstration he secretly witnessed while visiting Tokyo with his father. He saw a frail old man toss strong opponents to the ground using nothing but the momentum of their own attacks. The principle of non-resistance, of flowing with one's opponent rather than meeting force with force, struck a chord deep within him. Years later, After mastering basic defensive charms, he realized that wand movements too could embody this philosophy, not rigid, mechanical motions, but fluid expressions of intention as soft and circular as the Aikido forms he mimicked in private. By the time he was 25, Takada had already defeated 5 registered dark wizards, each in duels lasting no more than 3 seconds. His signature move was a silent sidestep combined with a flick of the wrist that resembled the Aikido motion of iriminage, or the entering throw. Instead of striking head-on, Kada glided past the curse, redirected its energy with a counterspin of his body, and released a precision, stunning spell from a blind angle. Observers claimed it was like watching a breeze defeat a storm. His reputation spread beyond Asia, and rumours reached even the British Aura office, where one young trainee allegedly tried to mimic his style and broke his own nose in the process. Takada's approach was not just about movement, but about an entire philosophy of engagement. In his scrolls, translated decades later into English and stored in the Hogwarts restricted section under the title Flow and Form, The Art of Preemptive Magic, he writes, "Victory lies not in overpowering your enemy, but in disappearing from their intention. A true duel is not a contest of force, but of rhythm and emptiness." It was this belief that led him to create his own school, the Kazeishin Dojo, where he taught a fusion of Aikido, traditional Japanese spellcasting, and what he called empathic anticipation, the ability to sense an opponent's magical impulse before their wand moved. A former student, Mei Kobayashi, later became one of Japan's top magical law enforcement officers. In her memoirs, she recalled her first duel with Takada. She had practiced the severing charm and disarming hexes for months before arriving, but she was disarmed within seconds by what felt like a gust of wind. "He never even pointed his wand at me," she wrote. "It was as though I tripped on my own aggression. His body flowed like water, and then came the spell. Soft, certain, fatal to my pride." Kobayashi later brought Takada's methods into official aura training, where it was termed the fluid style, though few mastered it with his same artistry. What fascinated many magical scholars was how Takada's style challenged the traditional European approach to dueling. At Hogwarts, dueling was taught as a structured series of attack and defense maneuvers, with fixed counters and textbook wand motions. Professor Flitwick, a master duelist in his own right, once remarked in Hogwarts, A History of Discipline and Dueling, "Speed and precision win the duel. Hesitation is a handshake with death." Yet Takada introduced a third element, intuition. His technique relied on reading the opponent's magical aura, interpreting the pressure in the air before the spell even formed. European wizards found this unsettling. A few even called it unscientific or dangerously close to legitimacy. But others, especially younger dueling enthusiasts, were enthralled. One famous demonstration of Takada's mastery took place in 1972 during the Tri-Nation Magical Summit in Mumbai, India. Though dueling was not officially part of the conference, tensions between the representatives of several nations led to a spontaneous, if unauthorized, duel between Takada and a French delegate named Henri Malvoisin, a duelist with a notorious penchant for dark magic. Malvoisin, a brute force practitioner of the hammer style, opened with a barrage of aggressive spells, confringo, bombarda, and a vicious variant of the blasting curse. Witnesses claimed the very air rippled with heat, but Takada never moved more than a few inches. His robes swirled gently around him as he spun, dipped, and redirected every blast with minimal counterspells. He finished with a silent petrificus totalis that seemed to spring from his breath more than his wand. The audience, stunned into silence, gave him a standing ovation minutes later. Though the British wizarding community remained largely conservative, some thinkers began to take note. One of them was Gaspard Hawthorne, a half-blood scholar at the Department of Experimental Dueling. Hawthorne spent 3 years corresponding with Takada and eventually wrote a controversial paper entitled The Path of No Resistance, Muggle Influence in Modern Magical Combat. In it, he cited Takada's blending of Muggle martial arts and wand work as a compelling example of cross-cultural synthesis in spellcraft, arguing that magical communities had much to learn from the physical disciplines of Muggles. The paper was banned by the Wizengamot on grounds of promoting unstable combat methods, though copies were secretly circulated in dueling clubs across Europe. Even in his own country, Takada's methods were not universally accepted. Traditionalists at Mahotakoro's School of Magic dismissed him as a philosopher-warrior, more performer than fighter. Yet this image did not deter hundreds of students who travelled to the mountains to study under him. It was said that in his dojo, lessons began not with spells, but with silence. Students would spend days walking the forest barefoot, learning to sense magical vibrations in the leaves, the wind, the soil. Only then were they taught how to weave that awareness into spellcasting, moving their bodies not against their opponent, but with them, like dancers in a deadly ballet. The Ministry of Magic in Britain eventually dispatched a representative to study the phenomenon. Dolores Umbridge, of all people, was assigned the task in 1995. Her report was predictably dismissive. Mr. Takada's methods, she wrote, represent a dangerous departure from the ministry-approved dueling curriculum. Furthermore, his reliance on non-magical movement introduces unnecessary unpredictability and risk. Yet her report failed to stop the growing fascination among young duelists, especially after Harry Potter himself used a similar sidestepping technique against Bellatrix Lestrange in the Battle of the Department of Mysteries. As described in Order of the Phoenix, he ducked under her jet of red light and spun to the side, not unlike how he'd seen the house elves dodge in the kitchens. Some dueling historians later speculated that Harry, whether knowingly or not, had absorbed a hint of Takada's philosophy, though he never trained under him. What made Takada's story so enduring was not only his skill, but the ethos behind it. He believed that the best duel was the one avoided, and that true power lay in grace, not aggression. In his final years, he stopped accepting new students and retreated deeper into the mountains. Some say he vanished entirely, becoming one with the forest he so loved. Others whisper that he still walks the earth, a ghost of magic and motion, waiting for a worthy student. Though Takada never made an appearance in any of the books written by Rita Skeeter or Bathilda Bagshot, his legend endures in the footnotes of history, in the quiet spells passed down between friends, and in the softened stances of young duelists who dance rather than fight. The magical world, so often obsessed with power and lineage, was reminded by one solitary man in the mountains that even in the fiercest duel there is room for beauty, and sometimes for peace. Number 19. Emotions can influence the outcome of a duel. In the dimly lit chamber beneath the Department of Mysteries, as hexes and curses sliced through the air like whips of lightning, one truth became painfully clear. Magic was not just a skill, but an emotion. The battle between Harry Potter and Bellatrix Lestrange had begun as a desperate defense, but quickly transformed into something more primal. Harry's grief over Sirius Black's death surged through him, and with it came an unfiltered rage. "Crucio!" he shouted, not from practiced hatred, but from heartbreak. The curse failed to deliver its full effect, not because he lacked the magical talent, but because his emotion, raw and real, lacked the pure, malicious intent required. Bellatrix, who had long mastered her emotions through cruelty, laughed. That moment captured a deeper truth in magical dueling. Victory lies not in strength alone, but in the wizard's control over their emotional core. Magical duels in the wizarding world have long been misunderstood as contests of power or memorized spells. But history tells a different tale. During the legendary duel between Alaric Thorne and Cassius Vale in 1783, observers noted that Cassius had the superior wand, training, and even positioning. Yet Alaric won. Later accounts revealed that Cassius was burdened with inner doubts. His family had threatened to disown him if he lost, and that pressure made his shield charms falter. Alaric, though technically weaker, had nothing to lose. His calm determination focused his magic like a blade. Emotional balance, not raw might, shaped the outcome of that duel. Emotions fuel spells in ways textbooks rarely describe. Anger can supercharge a hex, but often compromises aim and judgment. Fear can scatter concentration like shattered glass. Confidence, however, acts like a magnifying lens, intensifying intent and refining execution. As the famous duelist Séraphine Dumont once wrote in her private letters to the French Duelist Society, "Your wand does not reflect strength, it reflects emotion. If your rage outweighs your will, you will lose not to your opponent, but to yourself." Her duels were renowned not for their violence, but for their elegance. She had defeated darker, stronger, and more aggressive opponents simply by staying composed. In 1891, Séraphine faced Mordecai Brack, a brutal and unpredictable wizard with a reputation for shattering his enemies' wands mid-duel. In the records kept at Beauxbatons, it is said that Brack's fury exploded through his curses. The earth trembled beneath his feet. But Séraphine did not flinch. Her spells were precise, silent even, and every charm she cast seemed to anticipate his next move. Brack's final curse was a volcanic blast of magical energy that singed the surrounding trees. Séraphine stepped aside as if guided by intuition. She didn't win through brute force, but through emotional poise. She later explained in her memoir that she had not viewed Brack as an enemy, but as an echo of herself on a bad day. "Had I mirrored his rage," she wrote, "the duel would have burned us both." Tom Riddle understood this truth long before most. At Hogwarts he had already begun practicing dueling with a sinister edge, but even as a teenager he recognized that emotional manipulation was the key to weakening a foe. When he later became Lord Voldemort, he no longer relied on standard dueling forms. He broke his enemies emotionally before they even raised a wand. When he faced Dumbledore at the Ministry in Order of the Phoenix, it was not power alone that made the battle legendary. It was the extraordinary emotional contrast. Voldemort was cold and calculated, Dumbledore calm and compassionate. The spells exchanged were titanic, but the undercurrent was psychological. Voldemort failed to break Dumbledore's emotional state, and that was his loss. Even Hogwarts trained its students to channel emotions into spells, though discreetly. Professor Flitwick, former dueling champion, once told Harry, "You must mean it," when speaking of more complex charms. The implication was clear. Magic responds to sincerity, to clarity of intent, both emotional conditions. Lupin reinforced this when teaching Harry the Patronus charm. "The Dementor will feed on you unless you can summon a memory so powerful it drives out despair." The spell required happiness, not just as a thought, but as an emotion strong enough to fill every corner of the soul. It's not just dark emotions that play a role. Love, the most enigmatic of magical forces, is also the most protective. Lily Potter's sacrifice embodied a magic Voldemort could neither replicate nor counter. Her love, pure and undiluted, created a protective charm that even the killing curse couldn't pierce. In a way, it was the ultimate duel between hatred and love won without casting a single spell. Emotions once again shaped the course of magic far more than technique ever could. During the 1994 Triwizard Tournament, the dueling segment, though overshadowed by dragons and mazes, offered a brief but telling glimpse into emotional dueling. Victor Crumb's raw aggression made his spells explode with intensity, but they often missed or were misdirected. Cedric Diggory, on the other hand, maintained steady calm. Even when under pressure, his magic behaved like water, flexible but forceful when focused. Madame Maxime later remarked that Cedric had the soul of a thinker, and that alone had made his charms difficult to break. There are even tales among unspeakables, wizards who study the deepest mysteries of magic, that suggest certain spells won't even appear unless the wizard is emotionally attuned. The elusive flame of memory charm whispered about in the Hall of Prophecy is said to respond only to grief processed into acceptance. Young aurors have been known to fail casting it for years until the day they let go of their past losses. Emotion doesn't just influence spells, it reveals them. In the darker corners of history, some duels turned catastrophic precisely because of emotional instability. In 1647, the Blackthorn tragedy saw two brothers, Corwin and Alistair Blackthorn, duel over a family inheritance. Corwin, consumed by envy, unleashed a modified reductor curse that tore through both wands and ended in an explosion that levelled the manor. Neither survived. Witnesses recalled the ground shaking not from the spells alone, but from the emotional fury infused within them. The ministry placed a ban on familial duels shortly after. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement once tried to categorize dueling spells by danger level. What they found, curiously, was that the same spell, say Expulso, could vary in destructive power by over 300%, depending on the caster's emotional state. A calm wizard produced a simple knockback. An enraged one could destroy a wall. Spells, then, are not fixed tools. They are reflections. They mirror the soul, not just the syllables. Dueling master Garrick Ollivander, whose name is synonymous with wand law, often spoke about the emotional bond between wizard and wand. He claimed that some wands outright rejected those who failed emotional tests. The wand chooses the wizard, he famously said, but it also waits for the wizard's heart to align with its own. His interviews describe how certain wands become dormant when wielded by wizards in emotional turmoil. They refuse to channel energy until the caster regains internal clarity. One of the most heartbreaking examples of emotion-ruining magic came during the First Wizarding War, when Dorcas Meadows, a brilliant Order member, was ambushed. Overwhelmed by betrayal, her closest friend had joined the Death Eaters. She faltered. Her stunning spells missed, her shield faltered, and she fell. Moody later commented, "She died not because she was outmatched, but because she couldn't cast through her heartbreak." It was a cruel reminder that a wand can't save a heart that's breaking. And perhaps the clearest proof lies in the prophecy that drove the entire series forward. For neither can live while the other survives, a prophecy powered not by knowledge but by emotion, by fear, by love, by the unknown. Harry defeated Voldemort not with stronger magic, but with deeper emotion. He walked willingly into death out of love. That choice altered the magic itself. In the end, when the final duel came, Voldemort's spells built on fear and dominance were shattered by a boy who had chosen selflessness and peace. In every wand movement, every whispered incantation, and every duel waged in silence or thunder, the lesson endures. Magic responds not only to knowledge, but to the heartbeat of the wizard casting it. That heartbeat, racing, trembling, or steady, defines whether a spell will merely shimmer or truly strike. Magic, at its core, is not just learned, it is felt. Number 20. Duels can be used in magical court trials. In the hidden corners of the magical world, beneath the bureaucratic layers of the Wizengamot and the protocols of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, exists a little-known yet ancient tradition, the duel of justice. Not a mere performance of skill or pride, this form of magical combat is legally sanctioned and used only in extreme cases where evidence is insufficient, testimonies are inconclusive, and the truth is buried beneath conflicting versions of reality. It is not meant to punish or reward, but to bring resolution when ordinary means fail. The duel becomes the language of finality, and for those involved it carries the weight of both justice and legacy. Though rare, these duels are steeped in centuries-old tradition and governed by stringent laws. A magical duel under legal sanction must be approved by the High Council of Magical Ethics, a body older even than the Wizengamot, and its invocation is not taken lightly. The process demands a formal petition, unanimous approval from the Council's 5 sitting members, and a confirmation that all other methods of conflict resolution have been exhausted. Once granted, both parties are bound to comply. The duel is not a spectacle but a somber ritual, where each spell cast holds the potential to decide the course of someone's life. In these duels, no unforgivable curses are allowed, and the presence of neutral observing magi is mandatory. The objective is not death or destruction, but triumph through skill and restraint. The most well-documented case of such a duel dates back to the year 1722, when two pure-blood brothers, Lord Arthur Montague and his younger sibling Elias, found themselves locked in a bitter dispute over their late father's estate. The Montague family, already prominent in the corridors of magical politics, had holdings in multiple countries and a vault in Gringotts that, rumour claimed, required 2 goblins to carry its contents. When their father, Sir Reginald Montague, passed away without a magically binding will, the family's assets were left in uncertainty. According to verbal testimony, Arthur had been promised the estate as the elder son. Elias, however, claimed their father had verbally revoked that promise months before his death, intending to divide the wealth equally. Neither side could provide conclusive evidence. Memories presented in court were tainted by age and emotion, and the family's magical record-keeper, an enchanted book passed down for generations, had been mysteriously burned in an attic fire 2 weeks after the funeral. The case might have dragged on for years were it not for Arthur's unexpected motion during the 4th hearing. With solemn dignity, he stood before the Council of Magical Ethics and invoked his right to demand a duel of justice. It was a chilling moment. The court fell into complete silence. Not since 1689 had anyone dared request such a resolution. But Arthur, a skilled duelist and decorated veteran of the Eastern Border Wars, knew what he was asking for. He was not just seeking wealth. He was demanding the restoration of his honour, which he believed had been smeared by Elias's accusations of greed and betrayal. The council deliberated for 7 days. Their ruling was final. A duel of justice was sanctioned under strict guidelines. It would take place at sunrise on the 3rd day of the winter solstice in the Chamber of Trials beneath the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. The duel would be observed by the chief arbiter of the Wizengamot, the headmaster of Hogwarts, then Phineas Nigellus Black, and 3 witnesses of neutral blood, drawn by ancient lot. The spells permitted would be non-lethal but unrestricted in complexity. Victory would be decided by incapacitation or disarmament, not by death or injury. On the appointed day, the chamber was bathed in blue flames and enchanted silence. A few dozen observers sat in stone galleries above the dueling floor. Lord Arthur, clad in dark forest robes trimmed with silver, entered first. His wand, 11 inches of aspen with a dragon heartstring core, had not been seen in combat since the Eastern campaigns. Elias followed, his expression a blend of fear and defiance, holding a wand of elder with phoenix feather, a family relic passed down from their grandfather. Neither brother spoke. There was no need for words. The duel began with formal bows, wands raised in salute. Then came the first volley, a series of rapid-fire disarming charms, shield spells, and hexes of blinding precision. The gallery held its breath as the duel escalated, each spell brighter, each movement sharper. The brothers knew each other's strengths intimately. They had trained together as children under the same tutors. The duel lasted 17 minutes, an eternity in magical combat. At one point, Arthur's robe caught fire from a ricocheting incendio, but he extinguished it mid-motion and countered with a stunningly fast levicorpus that nearly sent Elias into the ceiling. Elias recovered and cast a brilliant Protego Maxima that filled the chamber with a hum of ancient power. But it was Arthur who prevailed. With a calculated feint and a delayed Expelliarmus, he sent Elias's wand clattering across the stone floor. The chamber fell silent as the arbiter raised his staff. The duel was over. Arthur had won. But then something unexpected happened. As Elias stood, Clutching his arm and blinking away tears, not of pain, but of humiliation, Arthur approached him, placed the wand back in his hand, and spoke the only words heard that day. "Take it. The estate is yours." The gesture stunned the court. Arthur later explained in a letter addressed to the council, "I did not seek victory to claim inheritance. I sought it to defend my name. The gold is meaningless beside the weight of truth." The letter is still preserved in the archives of the Wizengamot, often studied by young legal apprentices for its example of integrity under fire. To this day, the Montague duel of 1722 is considered a model of honourable justice. While the duel of justice remains an option in magical law, it is invoked only in the rarest of cases. The last known sanctioned duel occurred in 1884, involving two potion masters who accused each other of sabotaging a critical wolfsbane shipment. That duel ended in mutual disarmament and an agreement to establish a joint brewing guild instead. Since then, most legal conflicts have been resolved through evidence, memory extraction, and veritaserum. Still, the tradition persists, dormant but not forgotten. The rules governing such duels are housed in an ancient codex titled Duelia Veritas, bound in dragon hide and stored under protective enchantments. The book outlines not only the permissible spells, but also the ethical code required of both participants. Any attempt to cheat during a duel, such as the use of a confounding charm, a time turner, or a magical artifact, results in immediate forfeiture and potential imprisonment in Azkaban. The duel must be a pure contest of magical skill and moral conviction. Interestingly, Albus Dumbledore once referenced the concept in The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, quoted saying, "Justice is not always found in parchment and ink. Sometimes it is written in firelight and silence." Though he never personally invoked the tradition, his familiarity with it shows the deep respect it commands among magical elites. Even Lord Voldemort, for all his lawless methods, never attempted to subvert the duel of justice. Perhaps even he understood that some traditions are too sacred to be desecrated. Hogwarts, as an institution, includes theoretical teachings on the duel of justice in its 7th-year curriculum on magical ethics and law. Students study the Montague case in detail, often reenacting parts of it under supervision. The objective is not to glorify violence, but to demonstrate how controlled conflict, when bound by honour and purpose, can serve as a mirror to truth. As Professor McGonagall once told her class, "Power without restraint is chaos. Restraint without power is silence. Justice stands between." The legacy of duel-based resolution is not without controversy. Critics argue that it favours the magically gifted and disadvantages those whose talents lie outside combat. Others point out that emotional bias can drive such duels toward revenge rather than truth. Yet the strict conditions and rarity of approval mean the process is guarded by caution. It is not an option, but a last resort. Modern magical law still allows for its use, buried deep within the procedural annex of Section 12 of the Magical Disputes Act. Though the Ministry avoids drawing attention to it, the clause exists, a relic of a more personal era, when the wand was not only a weapon, but a voice. In a world where magic can twist reality and memories can be tampered with, sometimes the most honest truth emerges. Not from a witness box, but from the clash of spells under the watchful eye of justice. The story of Arthur Montague serves as a quiet reminder that justice is not always about winning. Sometimes it is about standing tall, speaking through action, and letting the world know that your name means more than gold. In the silence of that ancient chamber, as spells flew and robes scorched, the magical world saw not just a legal case resolved, but honour reclaimed. Number 21. Magical barriers protect spectators during tournaments. The clash of spells lit up the arena like a thunderstorm trapped inside a glass dome. Flashes of red and green erupted in the air, bouncing off the invisible walls that encased the dueling ring. Spectators gasped, held their breath, and cheered from behind the transparent safety charms that separated them from the chaos within. magical duels had always been more than just contests of power. They were performances, spectacles, and sometimes deadly confrontations. To protect the audience and competitors alike, magical barriers were not just recommended, they were absolutely essential. These enchantments, woven together by the most skilled magical engineers, could absorb, reflect, or dissipate spells before they ever reached the onlookers. Yet even the most intricate magic has its faults, as one harrowing incident in 1998 would prove with terrifying clarity. The European Dueling Championship that year was held in the outskirts of Vienna, a city known for its long history of wizarding diplomacy and its ancient magical amphitheatre carved into the side of a mountain. Wizards and witches from across the continent gathered, cloaks billowing and wands at the ready, to witness the crowning of the new champion. Among the duelists were names whispered in reverence throughout the magical world. Victor Kaltmann of Germany, a master of transfigurative dueling, and Gilles Dumortier of France, known for his brutal offensive techniques. The final match between these two was expected to be legendary, and it was, though not for the reasons anyone had hoped. The arena had been protected, as always, by 4 layered defensive barriers, the first to reflect, the second to absorb, the third to dampen shockwaves, and the fourth to nullify residual magic. The barriers had been tested repeatedly by the International Confederation of Wizards' Magical Sports Division. Yet during the final moments of the duel, when Kaltmann unleashed an experimental, high-powered blasting curse, rumoured to be a modified version of Confringo fused with elements of elemental air magic, the unexpected happened. The first layer of the barrier flickered, as if unsure whether the spell was magical or elemental in nature. The second cracked audibly like shattering glass. The third absorbed part of the force, but the fourth failed entirely. A jet of wild, uncontrolled magic tore through the stands like a hurricane wind laced with embers. Spectators screamed, some ducked, others disapparated on the spot, ignoring the usual ban on magical travel during such events. A section of the upper gallery collapsed as chairs and floating lanterns burst into flames. An 11-year-old boy named Lucien Wenders, attending the event with his grandparents, was thrown backward against the stone wall, sustaining a broken arm and minor burns. It was like watching a dragon burst through the sky, he later told the Daily Prophet. There was nowhere to run, the whole place glowed red. What followed was a near-immediate evacuation and a lengthy investigation by the Department of Magical Games and Sports. They found that the outermost barrier, a spell called Protego Circum Totalis, developed in 1874, had not been renewed during the final enchantment cycle. According to records, the task had fallen to Bartholomeus Heskins, a ministry employee with a long track record of competent service, but who had recently returned from leave due to illness. In the flurry of last-minute changes, no secondary check had been performed. It was a mistake that would cost Heskins his job and prompt a complete overhaul of security measures in magical sporting events. In the aftermath, safety regulations were rewritten by a special committee chaired by Andromeda Tonks, herself a former dueling champion and one of the foremost experts on magical containment spells. "We cannot allow entertainment to override responsibility," she stated in her address to the International Dueling Federation. Her team introduced mandatory double barrier reinforcements, new enchantment diagnostics before each match, and on-site emergency portkeys for every 100 attendees. "It's not about preventing duels," she clarified. "It's about ensuring no family has to worry that their child might not come back from a magical event." This was not the first incident involving dueling barrier failure, but it was by far the most public. Historical records detail a similar, though less catastrophic, event in 1923 when a duel between British Auror Marcus Flint Sr. and Bulgarian cursebreaker Ileana Drahoslava sent a sectum sempra spiraling into the referee's podium, severing 3 fingers from the unfortunate arbiter. Since then, barriers had evolved from single-layered Protego Maxima fields to multi-threaded constructs that combine defensive diagnostic, and adaptive charms. Still, 1998 revealed that even the most trusted enchantments could falter under pressure, especially when faced with experimental or hybridized magic. The rise of unconventional magic in dueling was part of a broader trend that had emerged since the late 1980s. With traditional spells becoming predictable and counterspells more common, duelists began inventing their own techniques, often blending elemental theory with combat transfiguration. Cultman was a pioneer in this, having trained under Master Combat Mage Carla Morgenstern, known for manipulating weather within closed arenas. The danger, Morgenstern once wrote, is not in the spell itself, but in the assumptions of the audience. They believe they are safe. That belief must be earned anew every match. It is a truth echoed in the books themselves. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, during the chaotic duel in the Department of Mysteries, we read, "Jets of light flew in every direction. Harry saw Sirius duck Bellatrix's jet of red light. He was laughing at her." There were no protective barriers in that underground chamber, only chaos and the raw force of spells meeting spells. But, in the controlled settings of professional sport, chaos must be tamed, or it becomes a liability greater than the duel itself. Following the Vienna disaster, Cultman voluntarily withdrew from competitive dueling. "My spell was too ambitious," he admitted in a letter to the press. "Magic is a force of will, but will without restraint becomes recklessness. I could have killed someone." Dumortier, for his part, retired shortly after, stating that he no longer wished to compete in a field that flirted so carelessly with death. Their duel marked a turning point, not only in the history of the sport, but in the public's perception of magical safety as a whole. In response to public outcry, the Magical Accidents and Catastrophes Division collaborated with Gringotts spellbreakers to create a new class of barrier known as Aegis Tempestis. Rather than relying solely on absorbing force, this enchantment redistributed magical impact across multiple anchor points outside the stadium. In testing, even the most volatile spells, like Fiendfire, were contained without internal damage. While prohibitively expensive and rarely used outside of world-level events, the Aegis system represented a future where dueling could be both dramatic and safe. Meanwhile, the boy who had been injured, Lucien Wenders, grew up to study magical engineering at Durmstrang, inspired by his close brush with death. In his graduation speech in 2015, he recalled the panic, the heat, and the shock of being so vulnerable in a world of power. "Magic can create," he said, "but if it is not shaped by wisdom, it can just as easily destroy. We must never forget that we sit on the edge of both." Though the dueling world has largely moved past the 1998 incident, its shadow still looms. Every chant of Protego, every flicker of wandlight testing a barrier before the crowd enters the stadium carries with it an echo of that crackling failure. New safety charms are tested every year. Old ones are discarded with care. Duelists are now required to submit a list of planned spells ahead of time, and any use of unauthorized enchantments results in automatic disqualification. The sport has evolved, matured, but the memory remains. There is a strange poetry in the idea of barriers within a sport built on breaking through defenses. The paradox is that the greatest duels now unfold behind walls thicker than ever before. The drama remains, but the danger has been cloaked in new layers of control. Perhaps that is the real magic, not just the spell, but the silent spell within the spell, the one that ensures we can still marvel at destruction without becoming its victims. Number 22, some spells are considered dishonorable. The world of magical dueling is far more complex than simply casting spells back and forth. Behind the bright flashes of light and elegant wand movements lies a realm governed not only by rules of magic, but by unspoken traditions and unyielding standards of honor. While the official rulebooks, like the International Code of Wizard Dueling, ratified by the Department of Magical Games and Sports, outline which spells are legally permissible during competition, there exists an older, more respected code, the unwritten law of ethical combat. This silent code, passed down through generations of duelists, dictates not what is allowed, but what is respectable, and within this invisible framework, certain tactics, though technically legal, are viewed with contempt, even disgust. Perhaps the most controversial of these tactics involves the use of spells designed to cause disorientation, confusion, or blinding pain. Not unforgivable curses, which are strictly prohibited and universally condemned, but rather those grey area incantations that teeter on the edge of cruelty and cheap trickery. One example is Fulgeo Lumina, a little-known spell that generates a blinding burst of light capable of stunning an opponent for several seconds. The light itself causes no lasting damage and can even be blocked with a well-timed protego, but when cast suddenly at the start of a duel, it grants the caster an unfair opening advantage. In theory, it's no more illegal than shouting loudly to distract one's enemy. But in the eyes of the professional dueling community, such a move is seen as a disgrace to the art. Ugo Richter understood this better than anyone and chose to ignore it. A fiercely talented duelist from Austria, Richter was a rising star in the mid-1990s, known for his sharp instincts and surgical precision. Yet his name would forever be entangled with controversy. He earned the moniker the Blinding Raven not just for his habit of wearing a pitch-black dueling robe, but for his notorious dependence on that very same flash spell. His signature move? Begin the duel with Fulgeo Lumina, then strike while the opponent is still blinking away the white blindness. It worked with chilling efficiency. Richter won 37 out of 38 professional duels between 1995 and 1997, and yet, despite his technical perfection, he became a pariah. What made Richter's case so fascinating was the split in public opinion. Some praised his cunning. "A duel is a fight," wrote columnist Lydia Skellhorn in Wizarding Weekly, "and in fights you use the tools you have." But others saw his style as treachery, a betrayal of what dueling stood for. Augustus Flint, a retired champion from the 1970s, commented once during a live broadcast, "You can teach a chimpanzee to flash a wand and pounce. That's not dueling, that's ambush." The harshest voices didn't call him untalented, but dishonorable. They said he understood everything about spellcraft and nothing about legacy. It didn't help that Richter's demeanor outside the arena was as cold as his tactics within. He seldom gave interviews and never stayed long at post-duel gatherings. At one tournament in Marseille, he left immediately after winning the final match, ignoring the tradition of shaking the losing duelist's hand. To some, he seemed like a machine, ruthless, silent, and efficient. But others believed he was simply misunderstood. Those who trained with him at Durmstrang Institute described him as deeply private, often retreating to the library instead of celebrating with his peers. His professors noted a troubling obsession with control. He would repeatedly practice the same spell for hours till his hand trembled from exhaustion. In one notable match during the 1996 Salzburg Invitational, Richter faced off against Léandre Moutet, a flamboyant French duelist famous for his theatrical style. The match began, as expected. Richter opened with Fulgeo Lumina. Moutet flinched, and the crowd groaned. But Moutet had anticipated the move and responded instantly with Umbra Umbrella, a rare shielding charm that deflects light-based attacks. The match then escalated into one of the most impressive displays of technique the tournament had seen, with both duelists exchanging fire and defense in a breathtaking ballet of sparks. And still, Richter won. The applause was loud but hesitant, admiration tinged with something colder. Richter's reliance on disorienting spells wasn't just a strategy, it was a statement. He believed dueling wasn't about chivalry or elegance, it was about survival. In one rare interview with Dueling Digest, he said, "Honor is for those who can afford to lose. I cannot." The words struck many as arrogant, but others heard something else: desperation. Born into poverty, raised in the underfunded outskirts of Vienna's Wizarding Quarter, Richter reportedly witnessed his father lose a wand duel over a mere parcel of land. That kind of loss stays with you. wrote journalist Anton Weibel. It breeds a fear of weakness so potent it becomes a principle. The result was a man who mastered victory but alienated glory. Prestigious tournaments such as the Wolfsburg Grand Cup and the Berlin Masters began quietly removing Richter from their invitation lists. No official statements were issued, of course. His wins were legal. But one organizer told magical competitions quarterly under condition of anonymity he could win every match, and still we wouldn't want him here. The audience doesn't cheer for shadows. The message was clear. In the world of dueling, there are victories and there are triumphs. Richter could claim the former, never the latter. The unwritten code that condemned Richter has existed for centuries. Even in Hogwarts, a history, there is mention of early dueling clubs where students were expelled for using jinxes deemed ungentlemanly. Professor Flitwick, a celebrated duelist himself, once remarked during a lesson, "A true duelist values control over domination, skill over shock." He encouraged his students to duel with discipline, to respect the moment of bowing, and to never strike first unless provoked. It's a tradition embedded in magical culture, taught not through punishment, but through pride. Of course, the grey areas remain. What about spells that induce laughter, like Rictus Sempra, or the Jelly Legs Jinx? Technically non-lethal, they can still humiliate an opponent. Are they fair play, or just playful cruelty? It depends on how they're used. Cast with wit and timing, they might earn a chuckle. Cast with scorn, and they become tools of disgrace. The difference, as always, lies in intent and in the eyes of the crowd, for dueling, though governed by rules, is judged by spirit. This tension between legality and honor reflects a deeper truth about the wizarding world. Not all rules are written in ink. Many are etched in memory, in tradition, in the shared understanding between wand-bearers. Richter broke none of the written laws, but shattered every expectation. He reminded the community that even in a structured arena, power can be unnerving when stripped of charm. As the years passed, Richter's legacy evolved. Younger duelists studied his style with fascination, mimicking his quick starts and deceptive angles. Some tried to resurrect the flash spell technique, but few succeeded with the same clinical efficiency. Ironically, Richter's methods became lessons in both power and peril. His duels are now dissected in classrooms, not for admiration, but analysis. He is remembered not just as a winner, but as a warning. Among the older generation of duelists, his name still stirs unease. "He cast light," said veteran judge Miranda Boyle, "but he cast no warmth." The irony was cruel. A man obsessed with brightness became a figure cloaked in darkness, and yet his tale endures, an indelible part of dueling history. Not every champion is loved, not every victory glows. Today, aspiring duelists are taught the full spectrum, from defensive poise to offensive restraint, from spell selection to emotional discipline. Richter's story is told not as a caution against ambition, but as a lesson in boundaries. What you can do is not always what you should. In a world where wands can both illuminate and destroy, the soul of a duelist lies not in the spell, but in the silence before it. Number 23. Some pure blood families keep secret dueling techniques. In the shadowy halls of ancient wizarding manors, beneath the crests of serpents, lions, and falcons carved into blackened stone, lies a tradition older than Hogwarts itself. Dueling techniques passed not through textbooks, but through blood. For some of Britain's most influential pure blood families, magic was never merely a tool, but a heritage, sharpened like a blade, guarded like a crown jewel. Among these elite bloodlines, magic was artistry, discipline, and war all at once. The art of the duel was more than spell against spell. It was a legacy carved into bone and soul, whispered in dim drawing rooms and reinforced in childhood with the flick of a wand and the bite of controlled power. The Knot family, a name that surfaces only briefly in Harry Potter's years at Hogwarts, is one of those ancient lines with roots running deeper than most suspect. Theodore Knot, a quiet and introspective Slytherin in Harry's year, was perhaps the last bearer of a tradition long kept in secret, the instant circle. This technique, rarely discussed even in the hushed corners of Nocturne Alley, was the pride of the Knots. It involved a sudden, near untraceable repositioning maneuver during a duel, achieved not through apparition, but through a synchronized burst of shielding and propulsion spells. When executed properly, it left behind a flickering afterimage, disorienting the opponent for a critical split second. In a fight where timing meant survival, that moment was everything. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, when Professor Snape comments to Draco about the more civilized age of dueling, he likely refers to a time when such hidden family techniques dominated the battlefield. Though formal dueling had long since declined in popularity by the 1990s, its echoes remained. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement knew well that some families trained their children with almost militaristic rigor, not merely for self-defense, but for assertion of power. The Knots, the Travers, the Selwyns, families like these viewed dueling as a rite of passage, and their rituals remained untouched by time. The instant circle was not merely about agility, it was a philosophy of movement. According to scattered archival notes found in the restricted section of the Hogwarts library, the maneuver depended on total mental clarity. The caster had to align intention, emotion, and magical impulse in one fluid gesture. Older Knots were said to meditate daily to perfect this synchronicity. A single flaw in focus could collapse the circle mid-cast, leading to a botched defense and instant defeat. It was this unforgiving standard that made the technique so rare and so respected among dueling scholars. It was said that Thaddeus Knott, Theodore's grandfather, once bested 3 ministry auras in a sanctioned duel during the Grindelwald era, using the instant circle in succession to weave through their attacks. One of the auras described the experience in a classified report. He moved like smoke. There, then not, then behind me. I cast a stupefy and hit my own man. No spell could track his shift, because the movement was not spatial but magical. He danced within his magical field, blurring the very perception of space and time. It was not teleportation, it was misdirection at the level of magical presence. Some believe that the reason the Knots were never openly accused of dark magic despite their alignment with the Death Eaters was precisely because of this reputation. The ministry feared them, not politically but tactically. They were known to possess skills that standard dueling manuals could not counter. And unlike the Lestranges, who favoured brute force and torture, the Knots were surgical in their spellwork. Their duels were quiet executions. But the Knots were not alone in guarding arcane dueling knowledge. The Rosiers, another ancient pure-blood family, had developed a sequence of curse deflections involving a modified wand grip, a 2-finger hold that allowed for finer motor control, reportedly enabling split-second transitions between counter-curses. Evan Rosier, a Death Eater mentioned in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, supposedly used this technique during his final stand against auras. It allowed him to disable Mad Eye Moody's eye with a precision spell, even as he was cornered and outnumbered. "He took a piece of me," Moody once said, pointing to the jagged scar across his brow, "but I took more of him." The duel was short, but it left a legacy of whispers about what the Rosiers truly practiced in private. What sets these family techniques apart is not just secrecy, but the philosophy behind them. Where modern dueling, taught in clubs and courses, prioritizes structured combat with regulated forms, these ancient arts are based on chaos and control, commanding not just spellwork, but magical intuition. To wield them, one must understand not only incantations, but the rhythm of combat, the rise and fall of magical pressure, the lull before an opponent shifts tactics, the scent of hesitation in the air. Dueling in this ancient sense is almost musical. Interestingly, no Hogwarts curriculum has ever touched upon such family-specific magic, perhaps because the staff feared encouraging elitism, or perhaps because they themselves had never been taught. Albus Dumbledore, despite his vast knowledge, never hinted at such traditions, though he likely knew of them. The duel between Dumbledore and Grindelwald was said to be the greatest of the century, but no records exist describing the techniques used. It is not unreasonable to assume that, like the Knots or Rosiers, both combatants employed ancient knowledge passed down through lost lineages. The practice of secret dueling arts raises a troubling question. How much of wizarding power is inherited rather than learned? When Hermione Granger defeated seasoned Death Eaters using standard spells and sharp thinking, she proved that talent and discipline could match bloodline. But in a battle of true masters, those who blend instinct with centuries-old methods, can the uninitiated stand a chance? These techniques are not taught because they cannot be taught in the conventional sense. They are absorbed through generations, impressed upon a child through ritual, repetition, and reverence. Some of these traditions have vanished. The Prewett family, known for their brutal yet elegant spell-chaining techniques, reportedly lost their art when Gideon and Fabian Prewett were killed by Death Eaters during the First Wizarding War. No written record of their dueling forms survived, and their descendants, if any remain, are unlikely to recall the subtleties of their methods. In this way, a bloodline does not only carry a name, it carries a living memory of magic. When that line ends, a part of the wizarding world ends with it. In France, the Delacour family preserved a less aggressive but equally potent technique known as œil de brume, a form of visual deception through coordinated bursts of light and fog spells that distorted the opponent's line of sight. This tradition, though weakened by intermarriage and modernization, was once feared in continental dueling circles. The last recorded use of the technique was by Apolline Delacour, Fleur's mother, in a contest at Beauxbatons. Her opponent, a Czech champion, forfeited mid-match, claiming he could no longer see the truth of the battlefield. Techniques like œil de brume straddled the line between beauty and lethality. Even among the Death Eaters, secret techniques abounded. Antonin Dolohov used a non-verbal curse, identified only by the slash-like effect it left on its victims. Though never fully classified, it became known to Aurors as the Dolohov cut. Its origins are unknown, but some believe it to be part of a lost Roman magical tradition passed down through Dolohov's obscure Eastern lineage. The fact that he could cast it without words made it all the more dangerous, proof that even the darkest corners of magic carry whispers of legacy and inheritance. These hidden arts have become rarer in the modern age, largely because secrecy is harder to maintain. With the fall of Voldemort, the Ministry began quietly tracking private magical instruction. Any unusual spike in wand work is flagged, and families once proud of their traditions now speak in coded phrases and private wards. The Knot family, after Theodore's quiet reintegration into society, reportedly ceased all internal dueling instruction. The Rosier line, fractured by war and shame, has splintered. A chapter of magical history is fading. Yet there remains something eerily poetic about it all. That behind the thin veil of order imposed by the Ministry, behind the cheerful chaos of Weasley's wizard wheezes and the lesson plans of Hogwarts, there lingers an ancient war dance, learned in whispers and cast in silence. In the flick of a wand, in the shape of a wrist turn, in the breath drawn before a duel begins, there is memory. And memory in the wizarding world is never just memory. It is power. It is blood. It is magic. Number 24. Expelliarmus became a symbol of moral strength. In the shadowed heart of the great hall, beneath the flickering candlelight and the gaze of 1,000 enchanted eyes, a disarming spell quietly rewrote the rules of magical dueling. Expelliarmus, once a simple incantation taught in third-year Defense Against the Dark Arts classes, began its transformation from a textbook spell to a moral statement in the trembling hand of a boy who refused to kill. Harry Potter's use of Expelliarmus did not just mark him as unique, it made a declaration. The most powerful magic is not always the most destructive. At the climax of the Triwizard Tournament, when Harry stood face to face with Lord Voldemort in the graveyard of Little Hangleton, he did not rely on unforgivable curses or devastating spells learned in secret. He raised his wand and cast Expelliarmus. A flash of light, a connection formed between twin wands, priori incantatem began. In that critical moment, Harry's choice to use a non-lethal spell reflected his unwavering resistance to becoming what Voldemort already was. "We bow to each other, Harry," Voldemort had sneered moments before. But it was Expelliarmus, not a bow or a curse, that marked Harry's refusal to yield morally. This disarming charm, originally seen as harmless classroom magic, began to carry the weight of rebellion. In the second book, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Harry used Expelliarmus against Draco Malfoy during a brief and somewhat chaotic duel in the Dueling Club. At that time, it was merely effective, but over time, it became his signature. Against Lucius Malfoy at the Ministry, against Stan Shunpike on the rooftop, even in the Battle of the Seven Potters, it was Expelliarmus that Harry instinctively used, each time choosing not to kill, even when threatened with death. This unwavering consistency did not go unnoticed. Professor Lupin, a man who had lived through war, who had lost friends and fought against the darkest magic, observed Harry's use of Expelliarmus with something between admiration and caution. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, after the skirmish above the clouds, Lupin scolds Harry for using a disarming charm instead of something more aggressive. "The time for disarming is past," he says, warning that Death Eaters could recognize him by his preferred spell. And yet this very predictability, the repetition of mercy, became a beacon of who Harry was. There is a reason Expelliarmus became feared. Not because it shattered bones or summoned fire from the skies, but because it made people question their own intentions. In an environment where most duels were measured in blood and silence, Harry used a spell that left his enemies standing. There's a kind of power in that which unsettles those who build their strength on domination. Voldemort, who murdered with impunity and trusted in fear, was met time and time again with a boy who would not kill. And this resistance chipped at the Dark Lord's confidence, not just in Harry's skill, but in the supremacy of death over mercy. When Snape killed Dumbledore atop the Astronomy Tower, he did so with Avada Kedavra. Cold, final, irreversible. But Dumbledore himself had once reminded Harry, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." In choosing Expelliarmus, Harry was not choosing weakness. He was choosing the burden of restraint. Magic, in its purest form, offers endless possibility, but how that magic is used, especially in combat, reveals the soul behind the wand. Even among his allies, Harry's spell was a source of tension. Mad-Eye Moody would have scoffed at it. Kingsley Shacklebolt might have tolerated it, but preferred to strike harder. Yet in a world where the unforgivable curses were legal under Voldemort's reign, and where morality bent under the pressure of war, Harry's insistence on disarming rather than destroying became an act of rebellion just as much as resistance. It was not that he couldn't use darker spells, he knew how, but he didn't want to lose himself in the process of winning. The duel at the climax of the series, at the very heart of the Battle of Hogwarts, is the most telling. The Great Hall was in ruins. Bodies lay scattered. Fires burned where spells had gone astray, and Harry faced Voldemort, surrounded by survivors and the dying alike. He didn't raise his wand to curse or kill. He did not call on the power of the Elder Wand, even though he had just become its true master. Instead, he faced Voldemort with Expelliarmus once again, proving that power wielded with mercy could still triumph. Voldemort cast Avada Kedavra, the most feared spell of all, and Harry, with nothing but a disarming charm and the will to protect, won. That single moment, as described in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, was not just the end of a battle, it was the culmination of a philosophy. Voldemort's curse rebounded. The Elder Wand, loyal not to Voldemort but to Harry, refused to harm its master. Expelliarmus struck true. Not because it was stronger in magic, but because it was stronger in intent. Goodness won because it did not seek to destroy. What's particularly striking is how Expelliarmus evolved within Harry's character arc. At the beginning of the series, he was a boy afraid of hurting others. By the end, he was a man who could have hurt many but chose not to. Each time he used the spell, it was a statement: I will not become what I fight. And that choice, repeated across 7 years and countless battles, made it more powerful than any hex or jinx. Other characters took note. Draco Malfoy, once proud and vindictive, found himself disarmed in more ways than one. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, when Harry casts Sectum Sempra in anger and sees the bloodied result, he is horrified. That moment reinforced what Expelliarmus had come to mean: control, compassion, limits. He never used Sectum Sempra again. But Expelliarmus stayed with him. Through every temptation, every betrayal, every scream of war, it stayed. Even the fans of the wizarding world have adopted Expelliarmus as a kind of mantra. In popular culture, it has become synonymous with Harry Potter himself. Not because it dazzled, but because it signified a refusal to surrender to violence. And in a series that revolved around death, sacrifice, and darkness, this choice brought light. Harry became the chosen one, not because of prophecy, but because he continued to choose a different path. The idea that a simple school spell could evolve into a symbol of moral resistance is what gives Expelliarmus its enduring power. Other duelists might laugh. Bellatrix Lestrange certainly would have. But that laughter dies when power fails. She who killed with delight fell to a mother protecting her daughter, not with hatred, but with love. And though that battle wasn't Harry's, it mirrored his own philosophy. Magic is only as powerful as the heart behind it. In a classroom, Expelliarmus might seem unimpressive, a flick of the wand. A wand flies out of the opponent's hand, but in the battlefield of choices it became a sword and a shield. It meant survival without slaughter, victory without vengeance. It was the ultimate answer to a world bent on destruction. And it came from a boy who had every reason to hate. Even in the epilogue, 19 years later, the spell lingers. We imagine Harry teaching his children not just how to wield a wand, but why to wield it. We imagine Albus Severus Potter learning Expelliarmus not as a technique, but as a legacy. A spell born in a duel, matured in a war, and sealed in the peace that followed. And though he may never face Voldemort, the lesson remains. The real magic is in the choice not to kill. Even when you can, for all the brilliant spells J.K. Rowling crafted into the wizarding world, none stand taller than Expelliarmus, not in spectacle, but in significance. It remains, above all else, a symbol of restraint in the face of rage, of light in the grip of shadow. In the end, when death screamed through the air and hatred crackled in every corner, it was not fire, ice, or poison that ended the war. It was a flash of red light and a choice never to cross the line. Number 25, Voldemort vs. Harry broke every rule of dueling. The final clash between Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort during the Battle of Hogwarts remains one of the most unorthodox magical duels in wizarding history. Though framed as a duel between two wizards, it shattered nearly every traditional rule ever laid down by the ancient customs of magical combat. There were no formalities, no measured steps, no bows, no witness to preside or declare the end. The confrontation between the boy who lived and he who must not be named became something more elemental, less a duel than a reckoning. It wasn't about honor or skill, it was about survival, destiny, and the future of an entire world teetering on the brink of collapse. In traditional magical duels, rules are clear and sacred. Centuries-old dueling codes require the opponents to begin with mutual consent, often announced by a formal challenge. Both duelists bow to acknowledge the seriousness of their encounter. Spells are cast in turn with judges ensuring fairness, but when Voldemort and Harry faced off in the heart of the crumbling Great Hall, none of these elements were present. The encounter unfolded in chaos and desperation, with spells flying amidst dust, rubble, and shattered glass. It was raw, unfiltered magic, forged in fury, grief, and defiance. The significance of this battle transcended personal vendetta. Tom Riddle and Harry Potter were more than individuals, they were living symbols, opposing forces shaped by prophecy, love, sacrifice, and fear. The moment they met, wands raised, the duel transformed into a mythic confrontation between the past and future of magic itself. Voldemort represented a warped ideal of power without restraint, a vision where fear ruled and death was the final weapon. Harry stood for something else: connection, humility, and the strength that comes from love. Neither man simply sought to win. One needed to conquer, the other needed to survive. This wasn't their first encounter with magic in conflict, but it was their most consequential. Earlier battles between them, at the graveyard in Little Hangleton or in the Department of Mysteries, were dramatic but incomplete. In those moments, Harry had always been on the defensive. But now, standing in the ruins of Hogwarts, surrounded by the bodies of the fallen and the eyes of the living, Harry was no longer the boy scrambling to escape death. He had become the master of its secrets, armed not only with a wand, but with knowledge, sacrifice, and the power of choice. There was no dueling platform, no audience prepared to applaud. And yet everyone watched: witches and wizards, Death Eaters and Order members, students and teachers, frozen in a half-circle around the two figures who had shaped the darkest years of their lives. Harry Potter, the book reads, was not afraid. The moment crystallized the essence of true power in the magical world, not the violence of curses or the sharpness of spells, but the quiet courage to walk toward death with your eyes open and, if needed, to return. The duel, if it could even be called that, was marked by an eerie inevitability. Voldemort, wielding the Elder Wand he had stolen from Dumbledore's tomb, was certain of his superiority, but he had misunderstood the wand's loyalty, and that misunderstanding would become his undoing. As he raised it, snarling the final words of Avada Kedavra, he didn't know that the wand was never truly his. Harry, in contrast, aimed to disarm, not to kill. "Expelliarmus," he shouted, simple, unassuming, and yet devastating. That choice, more than any hex or jinx, broke the logic of every duel before it. Dueling customs would suggest that disarming is an opening move, not a final one. In fact, the spell is almost comically underwhelming for a climactic confrontation. But in that instant, Harry's simple choice revealed the hollowness of Voldemort's philosophy. The killing curse met a spell meant to disarm, and the Elder Wand betrayed its master, launching itself into the air and spiraling into Harry's hand. Tom Riddle's body collapsed to the floor, dead not because of violence, but because of arrogance. Tom Riddle hit the floor with a mundane finality, Rowling wrote. No explosion, no dramatic fade into shadow, just a man defeated by the weight of his own lies. The absence of traditional rules was not an accident, it was a necessity. The duel could not unfold in the old ways because the old ways could not contain what was truly being fought for. It was not a contest of strength, but of ideology. Voldemort had built his power by exploiting rituals, artifacts, and fear. Harry dismantled that power by refusing to play the same game. He did not conquer Voldemort through superior spellwork. He stripped him of illusion, exposed him to truth, and allowed the magic itself to render judgment. The very concept of dueling lost meaning in that final moment. This was not two equals testing their might. Harry never sought to dominate. He never tried to claim the Elder Wand. He even attempted to reason with Voldemort in the moments before, urging him to feel remorse. That appeal, ignored with contempt, revealed the vast chasm between them. One had learned that true strength lies in compassion. The other had never learned to love at all. The symbolic rupture of dueling etiquette also mirrored the collapse of Voldemort's world. The Death Eaters no longer believed in his immortality. The protections he built, Horcruxes, alliances, curses, had crumbled. When the duel began, it felt less like a fight and more like a reckoning, a slow-motion collapse of a house built on sand. Even Bellatrix, his most faithful lieutenant, had fallen minutes before. For the first time in decades, Voldemort stood truly alone. The magic itself seemed to understand. As the final spells clashed, there was no priori incantatem like in the graveyard, no golden thread, no phoenix song. The wands did not struggle with one another. There was only a flash, a cry, and silence. The duel ended as abruptly as it began, as though the world had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. Voldemort was gone, and in his place just a man stripped of myth, illusions shattered. It is a curious thing that the duel defied every rule, yet became the most defining magical battle in history. What makes a duel legendary is not its adherence to form, but its impact, and no duel, however stylized or polished, has ever reshaped the wizarding world like this one. Harry didn't just defeat Voldemort, he disproved him. The duel showed that love can stand against death, that mercy can outlast cruelty, and that even the darkest magic cannot break a soul that chooses the light. That this moment came without ceremony is perhaps its greatest strength. There was no judge to declare Harry the winner, no cheer from the crowd, only stunned silence and a long, slow understanding that the war was over. That final duel stands as a paradox, both the most intimate and the most public moment in the entire saga. Two wizards faced each other, alone, and the entire magical world watched their fate unfold. Every student at Hogwarts would one day hear the tale. Yet no textbook on magical dueling could fully explain what happened that day. It was not a duel, it was a reckoning, a confrontation of what magic meant, what power could do, and who had the right to wield it. The books may record it as a battle, but the people who stood in that hall would remember it as a turning point, a line drawn in the ashes of the castle, marking the end of one era and the birth of another. And so, the duel between Harry Potter and Lord Voldemort will forever remain the most extraordinary breach of magical custom. Not because it lacked rules, but because it transcended them. It proved that the deepest magic lies not in spells or wands, but in the choices made by those who dare to stand in the face of fear. In that sense, it was not only a duel, it was a declaration, a reminder that, even in the darkest hour, light can break through. Number 26. Using potions in a duel is cheating. In the world of wizardry, where spells can twist the laws of nature and charms can reshape reality, there exists a paradoxical code of honor. Nowhere is this more evident than in the age-old tradition of magical dueling, a discipline that, for all its chaos and fire, demands discipline, restraint, and an unwavering adherence to rules. Among the many restrictions placed upon duelists, perhaps the most curiously stringent is the absolute prohibition of potions. No elixirs, no tonics, no brews of speed or strength may pass a duelist's lips once the match begins. Though potions are celebrated in other aspects of magical life, healing, training, and even warfare, they are considered anathema in the dueling ring. This prohibition isn't rooted in superstition or ignorance. It is born of necessity. Potions, especially those crafted for battle, can tilt the balance of a duel with silent efficiency. A well-placed shield charm may be seen and countered, but the effects of a potion coursing through a wizard's veins are invisible, insidious, and dangerously potent. To the untrained eye, a duelist under the influence of a potion appears to simply be skilled. Faster reflexes, sharper precision, greater endurance. But the truth is far from skill. It is, in fact, manipulation of the most cunning kind. In the early days of institutionalized dueling, before the formation of the British Duelist League in 1892, potion use was rampant. Spectators often cheered for combatants who could hurl 3 hexes in the time it took another to cast a single shield. The popularity of enhancement tonics, such as Velox Draft and Marlot's Miraculous Muscles, created a culture where raw magical ability was no longer the measure of a champion, but with time came regulation, and by 1904 potion use was formally outlawed in official league matches. Enforcement, however, remained patchy. The most infamous case of potion abuse in the modern dueling era came in the summer of 1965 during the British League Grand Championship. Gregory Shire, a towering figure in the sport, known for his calculated aggression and showy, almost theatrical spellwork, had made headlines for 3 consecutive seasons. Nicknamed the Human Hex Engine, Shire inspired both fear and awe in his opponents. But beneath his legendary dueling record, a shadow was beginning to stretch. Rumours swirled. Rumours of extraordinary stamina, of impossible recoveries mid-match, of movements too quick to be natural. It was in the final match of that year's championship, against the brilliant but underdog duelist Marion Roscoe, that everything began to unravel. Shire dominated the duel from the first spell. Roscoe, herself no novice, could barely keep up. Witnesses described how Shire seemed to anticipate every move, how his strikes came with inhuman speed, and how he shrugged off hits that should have brought even a seasoned aura to the ground. The match ended in a blur of blue light and searing flame, with Shire victorious once more. But questions lingered. Roscoe's mentor, Edgar Thistlewhite, demanded an inquiry. 2 days later, the bombshell exploded. Alchemical analysis of Shire's wand and robes revealed traces of Vita Infusio, commonly known as the vivifying elixir. This potion, long banned in professional magical sports, triples physical endurance and accelerates reflexive responses by stimulating the nervous system. "It is not a question of legality," said Thistlewhite in a later statement to the Daily Prophet, "but one of integrity. Mr. Shire may as well have wielded a second wand." The Duelist Oversight Committee acted swiftly. Shire was stripped of all titles and banned for life from competitive dueling. His name, once inscribed on every banner and badge, was erased from league halls. The scandal rocked the magical community. Public trust in the league faltered, and commentators openly wept over the fall of their hero. "He was our Goliath," one reporter wrote, "but he forgot that real strength must be seen, not swallowed." The aftermath forced the league into dramatic reform. Every duelist, from newcomer to champion, would now undergo pre-duel inspection, both magical and medical. Potion tests became mandatory. Any trace of enhancement meant immediate disqualification. Despite this, the temptation has never vanished entirely. The allure of power, the whisper of chemical superiority, it clings to the margins of the sport. Professor Horace Slughorn, in one of his lectures at Hogwarts, once remarked, "There are potions that can make a man run without breathing, duel without blinking, but they rob the mind of pride. And in a duel, pride is half the spell." His words, though spoken in the comfort of the classroom, reflect a bitter truth learned in the chaos of competition. Interestingly, not all potions are destructive in the context of dueling. Healing potions, for example, are vital in post-duel care. Pepper-Up Potion and Essence of Dittany have saved more lives in the infirmary than any shield charm ever cast, but even these cannot cross the line. To drink a healing draught mid-duel, even to recover from a minor burn, is considered not only cheating, but cowardice. A duelist must endure or fall. There is no middle path. The only magic allowed in the ring must come from wand and will alone. This philosophy has created some of the most thrilling and dangerous confrontations in magical history. During the 1983 France-England exhibition match, duelists were forced to continue through injuries that would have sent Quidditch players into early retirement. Aurélien Dubois fought with a broken ankle for 6 minutes, refusing treatment until the final spell was cast. His opponent, Rachel Glover, suffered third-degree wand burns but still managed a textbook disarming charm in the last second. "There is a strange purity in a duel," Glover would later write in her memoir, The Second Spell. It is one place where you can neither hide behind politics nor potions, only you and your wand. One could argue that the roots of this rule stem from the original dueling codes etched into magical law centuries ago. The 1482 Code of Walpurga, still referenced in the Wizengamot, states, "No man shall bear potion nor poultice into combat, lest he soil the magic with cowardice." Even back then, the magical community recognized the dangers of chemical advantage. The idea that one's strength could be bottled rather than earned was seen as an affront to the very essence of magic. Magic, in its truest form, was to be wielded with wisdom, not swallowed for convenience. Gregory Shire's name remains a cautionary tale. It is whispered in locker rooms and printed in training manuals. Young duelists are shown his matches not as inspiration, but as warning. Some even argue that his fall, while shameful, served a greater purpose. Without his scandal, the League might never have implemented the rigorous checks that protect the integrity of the sport today. In that sense, Shire became a martyr, not of principle, but of pride. The ban on potions has also deepened the artistry of modern dueling. Without shortcuts, duelists must hone their skill through sheer repetition and pain. Every counterspell, every flick of the wand becomes a discipline unto itself. The wand becomes an extension of the body an extension of the will. There is no room for error, and certainly no crutch to lean on when exhaustion sets in. Even at Hogwarts, the rule is instilled early. During the Dueling Club's brief revival in Harry Potter's second year, Professor Snape made no mention of potions. He didn't have to. It was understood. When Harry and Draco took to the platform, their wands were all that mattered. The chaos that followed, Snape's cruel tutoring, the accidental summoning of a snake, only reinforced that in dueling, unpredictability is the norm. Adding potions would have turned that chaos into certainty, and certainty is death to any true contest. The irony, of course, is that the wizarding world outside the arena is filled with potion use. Auras depend on stimulants during raids. Healers use them in triage. Even Voldemort relied on potions to maintain his unnatural existence. Yet within the dueling ring, potions remain a sacred taboo. It is the last bastion where a witch or wizard must rely solely on mind, muscle, and magic. No second chances, no quick fixes, just the purity of the spell. Some say the rule is outdated, that in a world where Death Eaters brew terror in cauldrons, potioncraft should be seen as part of a duelist's arsenal, but others push back fiercely. "If we allow potions," wrote Cornelius Spindle, former League historian, "then dueling dies. It becomes laboratory warfare, not magic, but chemistry." And so the rule endures, etched in law and blood and memory. A quiet but firm reminder that in the heart of magical conflict, true power must never be borrowed. It must be earned. One wand, one wizard, one truth. Number 27. Dueling styles vary across the magical world. In the shadowy chamber beneath the Durmstrang Institute, where centuries-old stones remember every incantation ever cast within their walls, the duel between Victor Krum and Alaric Vane erupted like a storm. Krum, years after his fame on the Quidditch field, had returned to the school not just as a mentor, but as a master of combat magic. Alaric, a fierce-minded student with a penchant for dark arts, had challenged him in the traditional Durmstrang manner with fire, force, and no apology. Here, duels were not about grace. They were battles of strength and will. Sparks flew in arcs of red and orange, lighting up the chamber like a forge, as spells clashed in mid-air, and the very air seemed to bend under the pressure of raw magical power. Krum did not sidestep. He advanced, wand raised high like a sword, deflecting Alaric's hexes with brutish counters, his incantations short and brutal. Confringo, reducto, sectum sempra. There was no elegance in Durmstrang's dueling tradition, only dominance. This fierce style stands in stark contrast to the approach cultivated at Ilvermorny, the North American school hidden deep within the Massachusetts forests. There, dueling has become an intellectual dance. Strategic thinking is prized above raw power, and students are trained to assess their opponent's tendencies within seconds. One notable duel involved a Thunderbird House student named Caroline Swift, who faced off against a visiting exchange student from Castello-Bruxo. Instead of launching immediate attacks, Caroline began by casting harmless bursts of light, misdirection spells designed to draw attention away from her real intentions. When the Castello-Bruxo student retaliated with a surge of vines from his wand, Caroline vanished in a burst of smoke, reappearing behind him with a silent stupefy. Her instructors later praised her for employing fog and finesse, a hallmark of Ilvermorny's strategy that focuses on exploiting distractions, illusions, and silence. At Beauxbatons, however, dueling is art. The long marble corridors of the chateau echo not with violence, but with grace. Alumni often say that a duel is a conversation, one conducted in spellcraft and posture. Delphine Margot, a famous Beauxbatons graduate and now a well-known wand choreographer in the French wizarding world, once displayed this approach during a public exhibition in Paris. Dressed in elegant blue robes and wielding a swan feather core wand, Delphine moved like a dancer. Her duels were choreographed yet reactive, as if she anticipated the next 10 spells before the first was even cast. Her signature technique, the rosée tourbillonnante, a spinning sequence of 3 successive defensive charms, allowed her to deflect a barrage of hexes while remaining nearly motionless. Beauxbatons teaches its students that dueling is a performance meant to honor the opponent, not defeat them with savagery. It is perhaps no coincidence that Fleur Delacour, also a graduate, displayed a similar grace during the Tri-Wizard tournament, even if the arena was not a formal duel. In Japan, the Mahoutokoro school of magic presents a philosophy entirely different from the West. Situated on the volcanic island of Minami Iwo Jima, where the ocean mists cling to the mountaintops like ghosts, Mahoutokoro's dueling tradition is steeped in precision and speed. There, the wand is often secondary. The body moves first. Dueling students are trained in fluid, near-invisible motions, their gestures sharp and precise, allowing them to cast without dramatic flourishes. It is said that in Mahoutokoro, a duel can be over before the opponent even realizes it has begun. A famed graduate, Oshiko Watanabe, once defeated 3 opponents in under 5 seconds during an international dueling showcase in Kyoto. Her spells, silently cast and invisible to the untrained eye, struck with a timing that felt like wind, changing direction. Observers described her movement as liquid thunder, and her technique was later analyzed by European aurors seeking to understand the sudden collapse of their dueling formations during encounters with rogue Mahoutokoro duelists. Even within the walls of Hogwarts, dueling is a reflection of British magical tradition, structured, formal, and often rooted in defensive mastery. The Dueling Club, briefly revived by Gilderoy Lockhart in Harry's second year, might have seemed farcical, but it hinted at a deeply embedded structure. British wizards are taught that protection comes first. This is evidenced during Harry Potter's battle with Draco Malfoy on the club's platform. While Draco attempted showmanship with a Serpensortia spell, Harry countered with a calm yet reactive charm, showcasing the foundational emphasis on swift adaptation rather than overwhelming offense. Expelliarmus, the spell Harry would later become famous for, is itself a testament to this philosophy: disarm, don't destroy. As Snape sneered at Lockhart's flailing movements, he reinforced what a true Hogwarts-style duel looked like: precise, unforgiving, and built on sharp reflexes rather than flair. In Egypt's ancient magical institutions, many now hidden beneath the sand or buried under modern Cairo, dueling is rooted in the sacred. Wands are often replaced or supplemented by staves, and spells are drawn from an older magical language rarely heard outside their temples. These duels are ritualistic, performed at dawn or dusk, and involve the invocation of ancient protective forces. A recorded duel between 2 keepers of magical tombs, Khemra and Saranai, took place within a burial chamber sealed for over 2,000 years. Their spells were whispered, almost sung, the echo off the stone walls enhancing their power. Witnesses described glowing glyphs circling the duelists as they moved in mirrored patterns. It is not violence that is respected in these duels, but the ability to channel ancestral wisdom without succumbing to chaos. Victory is seen not as defeating an opponent, but as proving oneself worthy to command the past. In Brazil's Castelo Bruxo, dueling is often fused with elemental magic and nature-based spells. Deep within the Amazon rainforest, where magical creatures roam freely, students are taught to harmonize with their environment. A duel between two students, Tiago Reyes and Mariana Silva, involved spells that summoned vines, wind gusts, and even the scent of flowers with disorienting properties. Mariana, when caught in a flame charm, conjured a brief but powerful tropical storm that extinguished the fire and sent her opponent sliding through the mud. Unlike Durmstrang's brute force, or Mahotokoro's invisible speed, Castelo Bruxo students allow the natural world to fight with them. They are never truly alone in a duel. The forest is always watching, and sometimes it answers. The duel between Charlie Weasley and a Romanian dragon handler named Lucian Petrescu, both Durmstrang alumni, during a celebration in Transylvania, became infamous for its sheer destruction. Both men used brute explosive spells taught in Durmstrang's upper dueling halls. By the end, the stone walls of the tavern where the duel began had collapsed, and neither man had a wand intact. But witnesses say they shook hands with laughter, bloodied and bruised, as was tradition among the more hardened alumni. Petrescu, when asked about the fight later, remarked, "If it doesn't leave a scar, it wasn't a duel." In contrast, Beauxbatons alumna Elodie Rousseau once diffused a potentially lethal duel in Geneva with a single flick of her wand. Her opponent, a brash young wizard who had insulted her family, prepared a string of curses. Rousseau waited, calmly watching his posture. When he lunged forward to cast, she sent a stream of petals, yes, actual rose petals, toward him, each petal laced with a minor confusion charm. Disoriented and embarrassed, he dropped his wand. Rousseau curtsied, turned, and left without another spell. In Beauxbatons culture, humiliation through elegance is the highest form of victory. Ilvermorny's most famous modern duel took place during a secret training exercise among elite student defenders called the Hidden 13. Among them was Jonah Crane, a prodigy from Wampus House. When ambushed by 3 of his fellow trainees, part of a final test, Crane constructed a labyrinth of illusions using charm layering techniques. None of his opponents could find the real him. By the time they discovered the truth, their wands had been plucked from their belts by summoned ravens. The tactic is now taught in higher-level Ilvermorny classes as the Raven Gambit, a lesson in non-linear misdirection. In Mahotokoro, dueling is not an event, it is a discipline. Students rise at dawn and train on cliffs overlooking the sea, casting spells in silence, judged not by strength but by fluidity. One visiting observer from the Ministry of Magic described their duels as a ballet with lightning. There are stories of duels decided with only 2 spells, both cast so swiftly they seemed like the same breath. For Mahotokoro graduates, leaving a visible trace of magic, shouting an incantation, waving too broadly, is seen as failure. It's no surprise that the Department of International Magical Cooperation has repeatedly struggled to standardize dueling regulations for tournaments. During the 2012 International Dueling Expo in Berlin, arguments broke out over whether Mahotokoro's silent casting techniques violated sportsmanship rules. One French judge reportedly remarked, "If I cannot see the magic, how can I appreciate it?" while the Japanese delegation quietly smiled as if they had already won. Styles clashed not only in the ring, but in ideology. Power versus precision, grace versus force, tradition versus innovation. Even Death Eaters, trained mostly in British traditions, revealed their dueling roots. Bellatrix Lestrange fought with chaotic speed, but always defensively, circling and countering. Her duel with Molly Weasley in the Battle of Hogwarts was fierce, but revealing. Molly used classic British counters, well practiced and clean. "Not my daughter, you bitch!" she cried, launching a full-body curse, born not of rage, but precise training. It struck like a hammer. Bellatrix was no match for the clarity of that technique. Each dueling tradition reflects something deeper than technique. It mirrors a culture's philosophy toward conflict, power, and honor. Whether it's the raw intensity of Durmstrang, the elegance of Beauxbatons, the strategic illusions of Ilvermorny, or the whispered lightning of Mahutokoro, the wand becomes more than a tool. It becomes a symbol of who the wizard is and what kind of battle they believe in.